I'll never forget the morning I woke up to an empty closet where my wedding dress was supposed to be hanging. It was exactly 6 days before my wedding, and that dress, the one I spent months saving for, was gone. At first, I thought I was losing my mind. I tore through the entire house, but it simply wasn't there. My heart pounded with disbelief, confusion, and then anger. Who would do something so spiteful? I had one prime suspect, my mother-in-law, Patrice. She had made it clear from the day my fiancé, Daniel, proposed that she didn't approve of me. Patrice had old-fashioned ideas about the perfect wife for her only son, and I wasn't it. I didn't come from the same fancy background she did. My job was too demanding, and I had been told more than once that I wasn't traditional enough. Daniel tried to stay out of the crossfire, but Patrice's snubs and passive-aggressive comments had been relentless throughout our entire engagement. She'd criticize my venue choice, claim she had allergies to the flowers I picked, and she even found a way to imply I was cursing the marriage by wanting a modern wedding cake design instead of a classic one. Still, I never imagined she would stoop so low as to steal my wedding dress. The day before the dress disappeared, Patrice had unexpectedly stopped by my house. She'd insisted on seeing the dress I'd been flaunting on social media. I'd only posted a tiny snippet of the lace on Instagram, but apparently that was enough to rile her up. I refused to show her, knowing she'd find something negative to say or do. Her face hardened when I gently but firmly said no. "Fine," she snapped, turning to leave, "but don't say I didn't warn you. Sometimes modern brides get too bold." I had shrugged it off. I didn't want her negativity to sour my excitement. But now, standing in my empty closet, her words echoed in my head. I called Daniel in a panic. He tried to calm me. "Maybe you sent it to the seamstress?" he suggested. But I reminded him I'd just picked it up the day before. When he finally came over and took in my tear-streaked face, he knew. We both did. Patrice had stolen my wedding dress. I knew I had to confront her. There was no way around it. So Daniel and I drove to his parents' home. I felt my stomach twist with nerves the entire ride. Daniel was furious, but he was also torn. Patrice was his mother. He never imagined her capable of such sabotage. When we arrived, Patrice greeted us with a pointed smile. It was almost as if she knew exactly why we were there. "Where is it?" I asked, my voice shaking despite my effort to stay calm. "Where's my wedding dress?" Patrice raised an eyebrow. "Your dress? Why would I know anything about it?" I could see the smugness in her expression. She was enjoying the moment. Daniel intervened, trying to keep his composure. "Mom, this isn't funny. We have evidence that—" "What evidence?" she snapped, looking genuinely offended. "Why would I want your silly, modern, over-the-top dress anyway?" I sighed, trying not to lose my temper. The last thing I needed was a shouting match. "Patrice, I know you disapprove of me, but what did you think stealing my dress would accomplish?" She scoffed. "I don't have to steal anything. Besides, if you're so convinced I took your precious gown, prove it." I didn't have a direct photo or video of her swiping it. Daniel, still upset, practically begged her to just hand it over. But she kept stonewalling us. Eventually, we left, empty-handed, exhausted, and discouraged. That night, I cried until my head throbbed. The wedding was just days away, and I had no dress. My mom tried to comfort me, suggesting we rush order something else, or borrow from a friend. But I had poured my heart and savings into that gown. It felt like a personal attack on the happiest day of my life. And then something unexpected happened. My cousin Lauren sent me a text, sounding panicked. She'd been at a local thrift store that day. She likes to comb thrift shops for hidden treasures, and she spotted a wedding gown that looked suspiciously like mine. When she looked at the label, it was definitely my custom dressmaker. She asked the store staff how they acquired it. Apparently, an older woman dropped it off that morning, claiming it was an unwanted purchase. The staff hadn't put it on the floor yet because the price tag was unclear for something that expensive. But my cousin recognized it instantly from photos I'd shared privately. Lauren confronted the clerk right there, explaining the situation. They agreed to hold the dress and asked Lauren to have me call them. When I did, I confirmed every detail: the lace bodice, the custom sleeves, the exact silhouette. It was absolutely my gown. I couldn't believe Patrice would donate it just to keep it out of my hands. I asked if I could pick it up the next day. The store manager was very understanding, but they warned me the dress had been vandalized. My heart sank. "What do you mean?" I whispered, tears forming again. The clerk said the train had been purposely cut in jagged lines, and the front had been splashed with what looked like red wine or some kind of stain. I felt a surge of rage and heartbreak. My perfect dress was ruined, all because Patrice wanted to sabotage me. I hung up and sobbed until I couldn't breathe. That night, as I stared at old family photos of Daniel's parents, I noticed something. Patrice's own wedding dress, once a source of pride in the family, had a certain vintage elegance to it. The longer I looked, the more an idea formed in my mind. If she wants to ruin my dress, maybe it's time I step into hers. It was an outlandish plan, one part revenge, one part desperation. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Patrice was so proud of her own wedding day, so protective of her legacy. She kept that gown sealed in a special box under her bed. She'd shown it to me once, bragging about how real brides wore classic designs. What if I wore her dress down the aisle? I called my cousin Lauren, who happened to be quite handy with alterations. Together we formed a plan to borrow Patrice's dress. But how to get it? That's where Daniel came in. "I'm all for standing up to my mother," he said, "but are you sure about this?" I nodded, determined. "She destroyed my gown. I want her to see me walk down the aisle in hers. Let the world see her generosity, or lack thereof." Daniel agreed to distract Patrice, while Lauren and I sneaked into his parents' house during an opportune moment. Patrice and her husband Robert were hosting a small get-together 2 days before the wedding. Daniel orchestrated a reason for Patrice to leave her bedroom, and that's when Lauren and I slipped in, found the sealed box under the bed, and lifted her vintage gown. My heart pounded the entire time. I felt a mix of guilt and exhilaration, but every time guilt started to creep in, I remembered the vicious tears in my own gown, the wine stains, the heartbreak. Patrice had made her choice. The dress was in excellent condition, but didn't fit me perfectly, of course. Lauren had to work overnight to adjust the bodice and hem to my size. She even added a little modern flair to the sleeves and neckline. By the next afternoon, we had a transformation that was nothing short of stunning. It still held that timeless vintage appeal, delicate lace, flowing skirt, but with a tailored silhouette that fit me like a glove. My mother gasped when she saw it. "You look like a Hollywood star," she said, tears brimming in her eyes. I smiled, feeling a surge of pride. "You wanted to ruin my wedding day, Patrice? Well, watch me turn your dress into the star of the show." The day of the wedding dawned bright and clear, a perfect spring morning. I kept my attire a secret from everyone except Lauren, my mom, and Daniel. He was stunned when he saw me in his mother's dress, but also proud of how I refused to be a victim. Guests filed into the small garden where the ceremony was set to take place. I could see Patrice's face from a distance, confused that she hadn't been granted a sneak peek of my wedding gown. She'd probably assumed I'd scrounge up something second-rate after her sabotage. When the music started and the doors opened for my entrance, I stepped forward. I wish I had a photograph capturing the exact moment Patrice laid eyes on me in her dress. Her mouth fell open in shock. For a second, I worried she might faint. A murmur rippled through the guests. They recognized it immediately. Patrice had shown off pictures of her own wedding for years. People began whispering, some even snapping quick photos. And in that moment, I felt more confident than ever. Patrice stood up, eyes blazing with a mix of horror and rage. She looked ready to storm down the aisle right then and there, but Robert gently placed a hand on her arm, trying to calm her. Meanwhile, I kept my gaze on Daniel, who was waiting for me with the warmest smile. The entire ceremony was surreal. I could see Patrice shaking in the background, as though she might interrupt at any moment. But she didn't. Perhaps because the guests' eyes were on her too, waiting for her to make a scene. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, Daniel and I shared our first kiss amid thunderous applause. The tension in the air was electric. Half the attendees clearly knew some drama had gone down, and the other half probably assumed we chose a vintage theme on purpose. Patrice couldn't contain herself for long. Right after the ceremony, she cornered me in the bridal suite. Her face was flushed, tears threatening to spill. "How dare you wear my dress?" she hissed. "You had no right. No right at all." I took a steadying breath, reminding myself not to stoop to her level. You destroyed my dress, I said calmly. You left me no choice. She let out a bitter laugh. So you steal mine? Do you know how violated I feel, seeing you alter and wear my wedding gown? I raised an eyebrow. Violated? You stole my gown, cut it to shreds, and ruined it with red wine. You donated it to a thrift store like it was trash. She tried to deny it, but the color in her face gave her away. You can't prove anything, she muttered. I showed her the photo Lauren took at the thrift store, the label, the stains, the cuts. Don't bother denying it, I said. We both know the truth. For a moment she just stood there, chest heaving. Then her eyes flickered with something like guilt, or maybe regret. She turned on her heel and left the room without another word. You'd think that would be the end of any relationship between Patrice and me. But a few weeks later, something surprising happened. She called me. I almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. Her voice was subdued, unlike the arrogant tone I'd grown used to. I wanted to apologize, she began haltingly. I know I can be difficult. I thought I was protecting Daniel from a marriage that wasn't right. But I was wrong. You two are happy. It was never my place to sabotage that. I stayed quiet, unsure if her words were sincere or just an attempt to smooth things over for appearances. I'm sorry, she continued, voice trembling. I went too far. I feel terrible about destroying your dress. It was childish and cruel. She offered to pay for the original gown, plus any additional costs I'd incurred, but I refused. I'm not interested in your money, I told her. What I do want is for you to respect my marriage and treat me as Daniel's wife, his partner. No more undermining. No more sabotage. She agreed, and we ended the call on a note of cautious peace. Daniel and I have been married for a year now. Life isn't perfect, and neither is my relationship with Patrice, but we've managed to find a civil balance. She still bristles at my more modern lifestyle, and I still have little patience for her controlling tendencies. But when push comes to shove, she's learned. I'm not someone you can just walk all over. As for the wedding itself, our guests still talk about the moment I walked down the aisle in my mother-in-law's vintage gown. It became an iconic story within the family. The new bride wearing the old bride's dress. A literal passing of the torch, but with a dramatic twist. Some people called it petty revenge. Others thought it was genius. Me? I think it was the perfect way to reclaim my day. Patrice might have ruined my original gown, but she couldn't ruin my wedding or my happiness. In the end, I walked down the aisle in her dress, letting her watch as I turned her petty sabotage into a wedding memory no one will ever forget. And that, right there, is the beauty of standing up for yourself. Sometimes you just have to walk in someone else's shoes or dress to prove that you won't be intimidated, no matter how hard they try.